We have the Nephilim, Blood Moon, Watchers, UFO, and the Veil. These are just some of the topics. I can't say that we're going to hit them all. But, L.A., why don't you give us a little kind of overview of what you've been doing and what you're going to be doing, and then we'll get into some of these topics.
Well, great. Again, Dana, thanks so much for having me on your show. And, you are certainly incredible at your post. You're a stalwart man. You stay at your post, and you try to do what your show announces, the name of your show. You warn people where we are, what's going on, and you certainly are a watchman of the highest caliber, and I certainly salute you, and again, thanks for having me on the show. I just got back from 3 weeks in Peru. I took a team of folks down there, an archaeologist, a forensic field investigator, Joe Taylor of Mount Blanco Museum in Texas, who did the casting of the skulls for us, which was just incredible, and other people like Ron Moorhead, of course, and Jillian Peck, who did our field illustrations, and my business partner, Richard Shaw, and we filmed Watchers 8. What we saw was incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible in Peru, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of photographs, of course, and most of that will be in Watchers 8, as well as Volume 2 of On the Trail of the Nephilim.
Now, there's a lot of stuff when we talk about South America. I mean, it seems like when all of this happened, you can call them, the UFOs, you can call them Nephilim, all the various appearances. The one place they didn't really seem to want to go was up in Wyoming and Montana. It was too cold, so they went down south where it was a little warmer. But, up front, I wanted to ask you here, what is the difference between a Nephilim and a Watcher?
Well, the Nephilim are the byproduct, and this is in my opinion, but my mentor, Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, and others like Gary Stearman of Prophecy and News hold to this viewpoint as well. Nephilim are the unholy progeny of the fallen angels and the women of earth. Essentially, they are the classic hybrid being. They are not fallen angels. They are not totally human. It's a hybrid. It's a mixture. Watchers are a class of angels. We read about them in Daniel, and the Watcher was called a holy Watcher. That particular Watcher was a good guy. And when we go to the Book of Enoch, which again is not part of the canon, I understand that. But when we go to the Book of Enoch, we read that 200 Watcher angels descended on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. And those were the Watcher angels, unfortunately, that procreated, took wives from whoever they wanted to. That's right out of the Genesis 6 account. Went into them. That's a biblical explanation for having sex with them. And, of course, the progeny was the Nephilim. And the reason for this is they were trying to contaminate the bloodline that would lead to Messiah, and they almost succeeded. Only 8 people were saved, Noah and his family, and the rest is history. And in my opinion, Dana, when it says that the Nephilim were on the earth, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men, that means exactly what it says it means. It means an afterwards, and it means a latter time, not the time of Genesis 6, but it's pointing to another point in history. I would even posit that Sodom and Gomorrah, and certainly Numbers 13, when Joshua and Caleb go into the Promised Land, are multiple incursions of the same thing happening. Fast forwarding into modernity, we see this happening, in my opinion, with the abduction phenomena, where people are taken by so-called aliens, and of course we don't believe that they are aliens. They are abducted. They are usually sperm is taken if it's a man, ovum is taken if it's a female, and in the female's cases, sometimes they are impregnated. The 3rd month of pregnancy, they are re-abducted. These fetuses are then taken from them. Several years later, they're abducted again, and they're shown a hybrid being. Now, this sounds incredibly way out and bizarre, and I get that it is, but having traveled in it for 25 years, I believe it's real. We interviewed Dr. David Jacobs, who's been studying this for decades, and he came in on the radio from Watcher 7, and it's absolutely chilling what we see.
Well, there is a lot of interesting things when we start talking about this, especially in the end times. I have a couple of personal questions, and I'll give them together. Number one, have you seen a Watcher? And number two, have you seen a Nephilim?
Well, the answers to both of those, I would say, fortunately for me, are no, I have not. I have no desire to, unless the good Lord decides to allow me to do that. There was one encounter that I had back 33 years ago where I was praying fervently in my ignorance that the Lord would let me see an angelic being. And I used to do a lot of running back there, unfortunately, more so then than I do now. And my stomach bears testimony to that. But as I was running this one particular day, it was twilight, and I live up in the Santa Monica Mountains with a lot of chaparral, and these are mountain trails I used to run. I don't do that anymore because of my knees. But these are mountain trails, and they were just a blast to run. And one night as I was running, it was, like I said, dusk. I felt the Holy Spirit sort of tap me on the shoulder and say, if you look at that knoll, little rise in the ground, which is about 100 yards from where I was running, if you look there, you will see an angel. And Dana, I have to tell you, I was absolutely terrified. And I covered, this was over to my left. I took my left hand, covered, I'll never forget it, covered my face, turned my face to the right side, and ran with one hand covering my face as fast as I could away from the place. So, and I believe it was, look, anytime these guys appear in the Old and New Testament, people basically wind up doing a face plant. And I'm sort of joking here, but when you read the account of Daniel, he says, and the angel appeared and I fell on my face. Well, in modern vernacular, that is a face plant. And the angel takes, several, it's not just, hey, right, it's okay, Dan, it's me. It's like he has to work on him 3 or 4 times before Daniel is well enough to stand on his feet. So it's nothing to be trifled with. As far as Nephilim, I have never personally seen one. However, I have spoken to people and interviewed people who claim to have seen what I would call a modern-day hybrid. Whether that's a Nephilim or not is conjecture. There's no way to tell. A quick little story. There was a pastor who was doing street ministry at a city up in Canada. He and his wife had a team of 2 other people, so there were 4 people. This man and his wife, and then another man and another woman. They were not married. The other male and female participants in his little group, and they were praying in this missionary type house, and they went out into a very rough part of town, basically the Bowery, and they encountered this man on the street who was very tall, black trench coat, dark black eyes, and very pale skin, very strange. And they were all taken aback by the presence of evil that came from this particular individual. And this pastor had enough presence of mind to get his team away after about 5 minutes of interacting. Well, from that moment in time, everybody's life began to this slow descent to where his wife almost drowned in like a foot of water, a freak accident, and finances, car wrecks, the whole deal. Everything just started happening. The other woman that was present with them died a very mysterious death within a year. And so they left the ministry, they took a sabbatical, and that's where he found my work, and he contacted me, and we spoke on the phone, and I interviewed him, and we both came to the conclusion that whatever this being was, it was certainly an unholy being. Whether it was a possessed individual or a modern-day hybrid, we don't know. It's conjecture. What was interesting was he was praying of the Lord, and the Lord told him he was going to send him an angel. And one day the Lord said, go to this particular place, and you'll meet an angel there. And so this particular place where he knew about was way out in the middle of nowhere. It was on an overlook that overlooked the city below, and it was a type of a place. It was like a park where they had a trail, and you could walk up to this high vantage point and overlook the valley below. So he arrives there, and it's snowing. There's about 2 or 3 inches of fresh fallen snow on the ground. And he climbs out of his car. He's the only car in the parking lot, and leaves his footprints in the snow, and he walks to this area and walks to the very end of it, and to his dismay, doesn't see anybody. There's only one set of footprints in the snow, and it's his, and turns around and starts his way back, and lo and behold, there's this man who he described as a modern-day Kris Kringle type character, and they stop and they talk, and he asked him what his name was, and really a strange name. I forget the name, but a very odd name. He said he had piercing blue eyes, and nothing really, he thought nothing of it till he began to walk away and go back to his car, and he realized there was only one set of footprints in the snow and only one car in the parking lot. This was in the middle of nowhere. So it was an angelic encounter. And I asked him at this point, I said, from that moment, have things gotten better? And there was this long pause on the phone. And look, it's not because I'm so smart. It's just because sometimes when we're involved in our own situations, we can't see the forest from the trees. And I'm certainly that way myself. The Lord has told me things and given me insight, and only to have someone else explain it to me. And then I go, oh my gosh, that type of a thing. And I asked him, I said, did things begin to get better in your life after that? Long pause on the phone. And then he said, my gosh, yes. And now he's back in full-time ministry. So, I mean, that's just a few stories. I could tell you others, but I've never had any one-on-one, absolute direct contact with either side.
Okay,
Secondhand.
So when we talk about a Nephilim, and to prove, the actual bottom line is nobody has ever seen a Nephilim with 100% certainty. They've seen various entities, but
correct.
Nothing they could say. Okay. Now, if you were to describe then what a Nephilim would look like, how would you describe him?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, and this cuts into our work that we've been doing down in Peru specifically. I've got right behind me a model that Joe Taylor made of one of the skulls. It is an elongated skull, which what I mean by that, it looks like a cone head. And what's staggering about this particular skull is it only has one parietal plate. A normal human skull, and we talked about this last time I was on your show, I believe, a normal human skull will have 4 plates, a frontal, 2 parietal, and then a plate in the rear, and a occipital plate. And there's a sagittal suture. A suture is like stitching. There's a sagittal suture that should split the parietal in 2 parts, which runs from the frontal plate to the occipital, the rear plate. And in this skull, and others down in Peru like it, there is no sagittal suture, which at best is an anomaly. The theory that we're working on, and of course we're trying to get DNA evidence, is to believing that these were part of a Nephilim tribes that were in the Levant, or the Promised Land, at the time of the conquest of Canaan. And as the conquest of Canaan proceeded, many of these tribes fled the area because Joshua and Caleb were wiping them out and burning the cities. We know that from the biblical record. What's interesting, Dana, based on our theory, we should have sites in the Americas. And I'm happy to say that I've discovered what I believe is a smoking gun out here in Catalina Island, where I was able to review the work of a man by the name of Ralph Glidden, who conducted primitive archaeological digs in the 20s. And you and I have sort of talked about this before, because I know your family was involved in that whole area in Catalina and everything. And I was able to go to the museum after a sizable contribution to the new museum fund. Not a lot of money, but a lot of money for me. And I was able to view all the pictures and his diaries and journals and photographs and everything else. And, if you go there with someone like myself with my paradigm, I'm looking for certain things, and sure enough, I found them. The least of which was a picture of a six-fingered skeleton, and it was very, very clear. It's not a bone spur. It's a fully developed six-digit, and the way you can see the way it looks like, if you're listening right now, take your right hand and hold it. Open your fingers and hold it palm down, so your palm is facing the floor. Take your left hand, put out your second finger, your index finger, put it underneath your right hand, and have that second finger pop up between your third and fourth finger on your right hand. So take your second finger in your left hand, put it underneath the right hand, and extend that second finger between the third and fourth finger of the right hand. That's what this thing looked like, a fully developed six-digit. But it gets better. I found a picture of an elongated skull. It looked like, I would surmise, hard to tell, it's just a picture, but it looked like a female buried with her 2-year-old. And the female had a very elongated skull like we find in Peru, and the 2-year-old or the 18-month toddler or whatever had a very elongated conehead shape that we find in Peru. But here's the smoking gun. There was one picture out of all the pictures that I saw, and I believe that many of the other pictures were perhaps confiscated or, who knows what happened to them. But there's one picture that was there, and I was able to take multiple photographs of it. And in it, it shows Ralph Glidden, who was exactly 5 foot 8 inches tall. We know that. That's been verified. That's been vetted. So we've got Glidden at 5 foot 8, standing in a recently excavated grave, and there's a skeleton in front of him. And Glidden is kind of standing in this thing. There's a pick next to him. There's a shovel next to him, and he's standing looking at the camera. And the camera's above him, elevated slightly. Well, I was able to take this photograph, and I was able to give it to 3 people who work with photographs and are able to extrapolate the sizes of different objects based on the photograph. Well, what's interesting is in front of Glidden, about 5 to 6 feet away, is a articulated skeleton lying in situ. In other words, it has not been disturbed. Since it was interred in the ground, the skeleton is not disarticulated. The bones are still together, and we were able to take that, and 3 different people weighed in on this with computer illustrations. And, of course, all of this will be in the book, On the Trail of a Nephilim 2. And this is the smoking gun, Dana. That skeleton was 8.5 feet tall, 8 foot 6 inches. One man put it over 9 feet, but I stuck with the conservative estimate of about 8 foot 6 inches. So here we are.
Well, that does weigh in with about what we look in Scripture. When
yes.
we see in the Torah, we're looking at
sure.
8 or 9 feet, although there's at times, that these things look like they'd be a lot taller. But see, if you look at it this way, if you go back to the Genesis account, even with humans, they used to live a lot longer. And so
yes.
the changes just in the humans have changed a lot. We don't live as long, so there could be changes within the Nephilim as well, especially the male and female coming through, that they can actually digress in various ways, just like humans do. And
I certainly would concur with that.
So the Nephilim, like we have, Negroids or Negroes, we have, Mexicans, we have Indians, we have Chinese, all different skin colors. Now, do the Nephilim, in any point, does anybody know whether they have the different skin colors?
Well, we don't know.
Like that.
All that, again, would be total conjecture and speculation on our part. What is interesting, and I can tell you this from our trip, that the hair of some of the skulls that we saw down in Peru, first of all, it's reddish hair, and it's not oxidized. It's reddish hair. And we were able to find one particular skull that came from a 22-month-old child, very elongated, very, very elongated. And when we look closely at the hair, it was blondish red. Now, you don't get that from, the typical Native American Beringian theory that Darwinists put out, that everybody came over at the end of the last ice age from China, and here we are. And frankly, the Native American cultures don't believe in that either. They believe, many of them, and I've talked to elders in different tribes. One Paiute elder, for instance, told me that the red-haired giants of the Lovelock Cave, they're people, they were cannibals, and the Paiutes herded them into this cave and set the cave on fire, and the ones that escaped were shot with arrows. There's another tribe in the Northeast that talks about the wars that they had with the red-haired giants who were cannibals. On and on it goes. And this oral tradition has been completely ignored by, the white man. Well, that's just superstition. That's their oral tradition. Says who? And the more I investigate it, of course, the more I realize that something is going on here. While in Peru at the Lima Museum, we talked to one of the docents that was in the museum, and we asked him, sort of off the record, he caught him off guard. We asked him, it's like, well, where do you think the Paracas people come from? And the Paracas people are these elongated skulls that show up in Paracas, which is just this beautiful halcyon of a place right on the coast of Peru. It gets no rainfall a year, less than 1/4 of an inch a year, literally. Excuse me, and sometimes no rain at all. One of the driest places on Earth, and that's why these remains are able to last thousands of years. Well, the docent, we said, where do you think the Paracas people come from? And without any hesitation, he raised his right hand and pointed to the sky. And isn't that interesting? And the timeline, Dana, is about, they estimate between 32 and I think 3,400 years ago, which fits the timeline exactly of the conquest of Canaan, Joshua and Caleb going in to the Levant or the Promised Land. So, you start adding things up and looking at things, and is it conclusive? No, it's not conclusive by any means. But it seems like the closer and the more research that we do into this phenomena, it seems like it's lending credence to the theory that Nephilim tribes fled the Levant and settled in North America and also South America. And that's our theory. That's our hypothesis. Some criticize me because I'm speculating, but that's what a hypothesis is. You're speculating that this is true, and we're out to prove it, and we're trying our best, and we're out in the field. And like I said, I just returned from 3 weeks in Peru, so, we're on it, like white on rice.
Well, it's really interesting when you talk about Catalina because of our family.
Sure.
And because I've got pictures of all the family. My dad died not too long ago, and I never did get out of him, anything at all about some of it. But there is certain things that really disturb me about some of these things. And I'm not at liberty to really go into it now. But this is something personal that, on my behalf that I have witnessed over all these years. And I've always wondered, where some of these connections went back to, and how come some of the things that I've experienced and came to know, how that could come into it. I don't know if I'll ever make it back to Catalina or not, but indeed our family was well entrenched there. My grandfather worked for the government out there. He was you could call him the mayor. He was also, like a forest ranger. He worked in the ocean. He was featured in the LA Times many times during World War II. And he was on some of the details, even up there in the National Forest in California, doing things. So it's that whole thing, even into California in there. So with all of this that you're looking, you haven't come across anything in California.
As far as, what do you mean by anything?
Like the Nephilim and stuff like that. It just, you have UFOs in California.
Right.
coming from California.
Well, no, I mean, that's the whole point. That 8.5 footer came out of Catalina.
Yeah. But not on the mainland. You haven't found any. Well, of course, with all the building out there, they could have destroyed everything anyway.
Well, here's the deal with that. The newspaper articles from the early part of the 19th century do talk about 9-footers, 10-footers being found on the mainland in California. I maintain that there are areas in California now where those sites, where you might be able to find something. But again, the Smithsonian Institute comes in and grabs all the stuff, and it's never seen of again. So,
well, not to mention the government. You don't know what they have. Now here, in Wyoming, we have the Nimigar, if I pronounced it right, which instead of being 8 foot tall, these are like pygmies, like leprechauns.
Right.
This comes out of the Shoshone and the Arapahoes.
Right.
Shoshone. And these are little warriors that were man-eaters. They weren't very big, but they were fierce. And so we have these kind of stories here that come directly from from the Native American people here. And
well, interesting you're talking about that. When I was in North Carolina several months ago, once again looking for information on the trail, there's a university there, and the legend is, and this I vetted this, when they were digging, they found these tunnels that were about 4 feet high, a whole network of them. And this goes back into exactly what you're saying, the little people. Also in Ohio, there's they uncovered not only with the race of giants, but they found these little 3-foot, 4-foot beings right next to each other. Look, for me, Dana, the bottom line is this, and I've stated this numerous times and continue to do so. For the skeptic, the New Ager, the ancient alien guy, some outside force is playing around with the human genome, all right? Some outside force is playing with the human genome. In my opinion, that outside force is the fallen angelic Luciferian host that has been doing it since Genesis 6 and is now doing it again. The bottom line, the fallen one is trying to create man in his own image. He's the master counterfeiter. And the way we're created in the image likeness of God, the fallen one is attempting to create man in his own image. And that's why this constant genetic playing around, as we see with the Nephilim and all throughout history.
Well, that's interesting because right now, there's been a push, and we've reported on this, that, that there is a push because of the technology that man's, living forever is going to be joined with machines. Now,
right.
My wife and I were working something just the other day. Matter of fact, there's people, and I can't remember the woman's name, but she's on the forefront of some of this, having uploaded her personality and a lot of things and made a computer into a robot that would reflect exactly like she is. Now, the Japanese don't have any problem with this where we may, but, so there's that push towards, this, being above the Most High, not admitting the sins, not repenting, but establishing and believing that through technology and man's ability we can rise above the Most High. Now, this is where mankind, for the most part, is really trying to push itself. And then so when you take the technology and you take everything that you've seen and then you put into the thing like the blood moons that are coming up,
sure,
then you have all kinds of things. And now, when we look at the blood moons now, and you think of the Watchers and you think of the Nephilim, I mean, are they alive? Number one, yes, the Nephilim are alive and well on planet Earth. Now, I maintain that today you will find Nephilim that are tall, and you wouldn't even recognize them if you saw them, because they're walking among you right now. And I believe they've integrated into society. Now, I get this from a prophet friend of mine, a Jewish prophet, that told me they were alive and well. So I can tell you that I have personally had an experience with a 9-foot-tall being, and that's all I'm going to say. There's a lot more to that.
I'd like to hear about that off the record sometime, Dana.
but I have I really hesitate to even mention it because I've had 6 absolute visitations. 3 of them where I became, I don't want to get into it.
Okay.
It's especially on this venue. Privately, yeah, I could, but it's disturbing, folks, okay? I don't visit this. I rebuke these things, okay? They don't come near me anymore. Now, the blood moon. Now, what's interesting, I think, when you get over here, and of course, every time we talk about a blood moon, it always involves Israel. Now, by the way, I am writing a book, and I'm about a third through it. And I can't
wow!
give you
Congratulations.
the title. This is my 4th book, but it is not like anything else. This is an end of days, and it will have all kinds of things that you may have read about in it. And it will have Nephilim in it as well, and it does have, and a few others. But I said all that to illustrate that in Israel, not too long ago, Barry Chamish, I interviewed him years ago, and he brought this up. He's the one who wrote the book on it, talking about the day that the giants came back to Israel.
I'm very familiar with Chamish. I've met him and read his book. I understand where you're going with this. And
so we have this blood moon, and there's always something that's going to happen in a blood moon with Israel. Usually, if you get back to the Jewish Talmud, the blood moon, because of course the red, means the sword is coming, according to the Talmud. Now, whether anything is going to come of it this time, but the history, okay, every time it happens, it's something for Israel. Now, not just for Israel, but those who treat Israel a certain way, okay, which would include America. Never at any time in this nation's history have we ever reached a point like we have right now, where we have, number one, an American policy which is anti-Israel, a president and an administration that is pushing Israel into bad decisions, that has joined forces with Arabs. They are actually fighting with Syria, Iran, and Iraq, over in Fallujah. And so when you look at this, what are some of your ideas, or what are you looking at? What are some of the potential that you see for April 15th, October 8th, March 20th, and April 4th? That's 2014 and 2015, folks. Okay.
Well, I interviewed Mark Biltz on my radio show, Acceleration Radio, and it's fascinating. We don't. All I can tell people is just wait and watch and pray and see what happens. But I know, like you do, that the blood moons are very important to Israel. And I think we would do ourselves a disservice as watchmen if we didn't keep an eye on this thing. And you're keeping an eye on it, I'm keeping an eye on it, and Gary Stearman of Prophecy Human News and other watchmen are keeping an eye on it. That's what we need to do. That's what our calling is, and that's what we do. Try to do as faithfully as possible. That being said, everything that's going on, specifically in the Middle East, causes me great alarm. I'm looking at what's transpiring over there, and I am alarmed at what I see, and that's sort of an understatement. That place is seething, literally seething. And this morning there was an article which I posted on my blog, lamarzulli.wordpress.com. One of the Israeli generals or whatever stated that there was 175,000 rockets now pointed at Tel Aviv. Now, years ago when I wrote Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, and that's like, that book's 7 years old now, and I posited that we had approximately 100,000 rockets pointed at Tel Aviv, and now the number is up around 175. Look, there's one thing that unites the entire Arab world that surpasses the 1,300-year-old schism in Islam between Sunni and Shia Muslim, and that, of course, is the hatred, the unmitigated hatred of Israel, to the point where this whole land for peace thing is an absolute joke. Anybody with half a brain knows it. There's no way in the world the Arabs and the Muslims ever, they don't want peace with Israel. They have stated over and over again, not one grain of sand will be to the Israelis. I mean, any research at all into what these guys are really talking about will show their true motives. And their true motives basically is to attempt to gain some sort of an upper hand, and then at some point when the Israelis are not expecting it, which they've already done, by the way, they will attack and try to wipe Israel off the map. And this has been prophesied in the Psalm 83 war, which my friend and colleague Bill Salos has written several books about and has toured the country. And people like Chuck Missler and Gary Stearman at first were skeptical, as I was. Now we've seemed to embrace the fact that Psalm 83 may be one of the missing parts of the Middle Eastern puzzle. Added to that, of course, is the Isaiah 17 prophecy, which talks about the destruction of Damascus. And who would have imagined that Damascus would be literally taken apart brick by brick by its own people? And that's what's going on in that bloody 2-year civil war in Syria, which has been going on now for almost over 2 years and left well over 100,000 people dead in its wake. Morsi was ousted. The Muslim Brotherhood took over in Egypt. Everyone, all right, the Muslim Brotherhood, and that lasted less than a year. And the people realized what they were getting, and there was a military coup. And now Morsi's in a steel cage, with a glass cage, steel cage, where he's being censored and he's on trial. Where this new guy Sisi has come in, and now he's got a lot of work to do. Egypt is dirt poor, and I've never been there, but friends of mine have. Dirt poor, and it's just a mess. So the bottom line is this: the Middle East is an absolute quagmire. And then you got some guy like John Kerry going over there and trying to force feed this peace process to the Israelis. They want to divide Jerusalem. The Obama administration want Israel to go back to its 67 borders. And what's interesting is in one of our watchers, I believe it's watchers either 4 or 5, we sat down with a gentleman who works at the Knesset for Danny Dannon, who's the Speaker of the Knesset. And this particular gentleman, whose name escapes me at the moment, so forgive me for that, but stated that Sharon, when Sharon was president or prime minister of Israel, he took Bush, the younger, our last president, up in a helicopter, and he toured Bush from the north part of Israel to the south part of Israel. It takes about a little over an hour to do in a helicopter. And Bush got it. Bush saw where the 67 borders were and realized that they were totally indefensible. And yet here we are several years later, and we've got the Obama administration trying to ramrod this so-called peace deal down the Israelis' throat, which immediately puts the Israelis at a huge military disadvantage by having them go back to the pre-67 border. The pre-67 border is a very narrow strip of land. It's about 7 miles wide. It's completely indefensible. It would cut Israel off in 2 places, which is what they tried to do. And in the 67 war, of course, Israel defeated its Arab neighbors, which attacked her en masse. So we've got precedents for this. Nothing has changed over there. Mahmoud Abbas and others of his ilk, they will say whatever they have to do to get money from the EU and the United Nations or whatever, and they'll look nice for the camera. But in my opinion, the bottom line here, there's no way in the world these Hezbollah, the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, any of these people want peace with Israel. They do not want it. Added to this, Dana, since we're into the Middle East, is the Shia Crescent, which, remember, Islam is split into two factions, Shia and Sunni. The majority is the Sunni branch of Islam, and of course the Saudis, Saudi Arabia, where the holy cities, their holy cities, I should say, of Mecca and Medina, are located, are controlled by Saudi Arabia, which is predominantly Sunni. And so they look at the Shia Crescent being formed, which is Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. Hezbollah is mostly Shia. And, of course, the Alawite kingdom in Syria, huge Syrian population. They're looking at this Shia Crescent, and they're terrified because Iran is just a hop, skip, and a jump from Saudi Arabia. You know, you pop over the Strait of Hormuz there, and bam, you're in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis know this, and they're terrified. And so it's a very, very complex situation. Then you throw in Gog and Magog with Putin and Russia, and it becomes even more complex. Well, what's interesting is biblical prophecy talks about this. And Dana, you know, you and I have spent other shows where we have talked about it, you know, go back 6 years ago, and you can see some of those shows where you and I are talking about Ezekiel 38 and Isaiah 17, and people go, well, why hasn't it happened yet? Well, we've got to be patient, folks. You know, God is very patient, and when this thing happens, it will be a game changer. Hundreds of thousands of people will lose their lives. So, you know, who wants to see that? No one does. And yet that's what the Bible says is going to happen in the latter days. I believe we're in the latter days, and I think the time, I'm not a date setter, Dana, as you know, but I think we're running out of time. May see something this year. Who knows? I'm speculating. It's not prophecy. I want to make that real clear.
Yeah, we don't want to hang you out to dry. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
We do quote prophets, by the way, around here. Yeah,
absolutely.
Jeremiah, Isaiah. But the thing of it is that, folks, if you don't think anything's been happening, you haven't been watching, because we've been watching it for many years.